Good morning. Thank you, Stephanie, and thank you for scripting this for me. I had a late night. Aimbridge is proud to sponsor this session, Recruitment, Retention, and Rethinking Hospitality Human Capital. In this panel discussion, our industry experts will present brief reflections on the current state of the hotel industry's labor conditions, best and better work practices, and emerging innovations in the world of recruitment, retention, and rethinking human capital. So please welcome to the stage Joe, Dario, Tracy, Will, and Philip.
All right. Is this? How's everybody doing? Can everybody hear me all right? It's right after the coffee break, so I just need to make sure you're all still here. Amazing. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, panelists, for joining us today. I thought what we would do, just to kick things off, is just to kind of set the stage for what we'll be doing in this panel. I think it's important before we jump right into looking at solutions that we're presently facing with the labor challenges, I think we should set the frame of first understanding the scope of the challenges that we're experiencing. And I wanted to just share a few quotable insights from two pretty historic figures just to set the stage. So the first is this. If I only had an hour to chop down a tree, I would spend the first 45 minutes sharpening my axe. That's a quote from Abraham Lincoln, so just think about the next 45 minutes as a collective axe sharpening. And the second set of quotes, in researching a piece that I wrote for Stay magazine recently, I came across some speaking notes from an address that Four Seasons founder Isidore Sharp gave to the Conference Board of Canada at its Tourism Outlook conference. Here are a few pearls of wisdom from that speech that I think are important. Both the hotel and restaurant sector will face a semi-skilled labor shortage, and greater labor mobility will aggravate the turnover problem. I think we've been making some headway convincing colleges and career advisors that hotels can be a worthwhile career. But building a hotel image is not like creating a political image. We're dead if we don't deliver on our promise. And the final quote from Mr. Sharp, service is the battleground of hotels. Finding, keeping, and developing employees will be a major preoccupation in our future. A recent Horwath survey points out another problem, and I quote, which is me quoting Isidore Sharp, quoting the Horwath survey for the record. The issue of the more efficient use of labor has largely been ignored by the hotel industry. Management has been more concerned with controlling labor than developing it. So those are a few key insights to kick us off, but in case you were wondering, that address was given in 1989. I have in my notes here, pause for collective gasp. Yeah. 1989. This is not an issue that's new to us. This is something that we've been struggling with for a long time. So let's get right into it. Philip, I'm going to ask the first question to you. Tourism HR Canada does lots of research specifically related to the labor scope of our industry. Can you give us a little bit of a high-level summary of where are we at right now in terms of labor supply versus labor demand and any of the trends that are popping up right now from a data perspective?
Well, I thank you, Joe, for the question, and I'm always the bearer of the bad news to start, but I think it's a good place to begin. If I take you back to the beginning of the pandemic, within the first 10 weeks, this industry lost 882,000 workers. A good portion of those were in the hotel sector, the hardest hit of our five industries. Today, we have just over 400,000 fewer workers than we normally would have at this time of year, pre-pandemic times. And just so that everyone is clear, even today, as of data from 2 weeks ago, in fact, we currently have about 225,000 job vacancies. Those are jobs that are advertised and unfilled. The current employment levels are what we had in 2016 at the same time. That's 15 years ago. So you can see we've got some work to do to recover. But it's a little a different time than it was 15 years ago. The recovery is going to be quite a protracted and spotty situation. Right now, unemployment in Canada is at nearly record levels at about 5.5% across the economy. In tourism, it's on average about twice that. And in fact, it typically and historically has often been about twice the unemployment level. So we're basically still down about 23% of our workforce overall. And for those that we've been able to hold on to and bring back, we're operating at about 60% of their normal hours. So there's room for recovery for sure. In February, there is a little bit of glimmer of some hope, I guess you could say. There was in the Canadian economy a recovery of 337,000 jobs, quite a bit more than what economists were predicting. The better news story is that about 180 of those, thousands of those jobs were actually in the tourism sector. About 45% of those were attributed to hotel jobs. So that's a helpful sign, but I gotta tell you, moving forward, it's going to be quite a challenge because the market is tightening. There is, in fact, we, at our current projections as of January, do not see recovery until 2025 at the earliest, 2028 for a number of occupations, some even lagging beyond that, particularly in management and executive roles. I was just telling one of our colleagues here at the break that the biggest exodus we're seeing, and the ones that probably should keep you up night more than ever, is at the executive and operational level. And that exodus has happened because the economy has grown while we've been in this pandemic. And those jobs, the skills of those players, have been in hot demand by a number of other industries. Healthcare in particular, IT, and in public servants is where most of them have gone. But there's also been a high retirement rate, higher than we've seen in the 30 years that we've tracked it. To add to that, I might add that it is an aging population. We, at the moment, have most of the 40% of the population working is between 55 and 59. And there's going to be about 3.9 thousand jobs open from just the exodus of people retiring over the next decade. So we're in a very tight situation. Finally, I want to add one more thing before I hand it back to you, Joe, because we've been talking a lot about just the numbers of workers, and that indeed is a key metric. But I want to reinforce that it's not just the numbers game here. One of the other major concerns is the skills issue. The skills gap is a growing concern for us. Depending on the role you're in and where you are in Canada, somewhere between 25 and 40% of our workers do not have the skills to do their job well. In other words, that's impacting productivity. It's also impacting things like retention. There is a mismatch. That mismatch has to be addressed. We are not optimizing our current workforce. And finally, the other key dimension that's contributing to a lot of our challenges, basically around mobility or employment barriers. I'm sure all of you face that and know things like housing and other factors are contributing to some of our challenges in being able to attract and retain workers. Since this sector is going to be last to recover and is protracted and spotty, it only gets tighter as we move forward. So that's my positive message to start, Joe.
Thank you, Philip. We always seek data, we seek insight, so you don't have to worry about being positive. We just need the truth. So a logical next step in terms of looking down that talent pipeline then is to reflect on the post-secondary education system, specifically in those programs that support the hospitality and tourism industry, hotel, resorts, restaurants. And so Dario, I'm going to ask the next question to you, but just before I do, I think what's important is the reason that I asked you to be on this panel is you spent most of your career in the hotel industry and then transitioned into the education world. So you're a rare breed, and I appreciate your insight of being able to understand both industries. Sometimes post-secondary enrollment is a little bit harder to access in terms of looking at overall data trends, or maybe not even something that people in the hotel industry need to look at, but it is often a lagging indicator of the health of our talent pipeline. And so that all being said, would appreciate your insight in terms of what are the hospitality and tourism related program enrollment trends right now. We've heard lots about international students, domestic students, but if we're trying to build a workforce, and our post-secondary education system is designed to support that workforce. Give us a sense of what's happening right now.
Yeah, thank you, Joe, and thank you for including me in this panel for this important conversation. I'm sorry to follow that trend, but the news are not that great either when it comes to enrollment trends. And we have seen that trend since 2012. We've seen a decrease on enrollment, specifically in domestic. When we talk about domestic enrollment, it's about residents of Canada. And there is a reason why I want to talk a little bit about that. So we've seen a trend, a decline, and if we look at the numbers from 2014 to today, we've seen a decline of almost 50% nationwide on students engaging in hospitality, tourism, and culinary education, which is alarming because we have a huge gap, a talent gap in the country. I was talking about domestic enrollment. Why do I say that, and why is that number that important? Because as you may or may not know, publicly funded institutions, colleges and universities depend on the government, and the government funds based on the number of domestic students getting into your programs. So what happened with these institutions? Post-secondary institutions need to find ways of sustaining their finances and financial sustainability. So we went to the international market in order to balance that lack of funding from the government. So although, and I mentioned before, we've seen a decrease on 50% on domestic enrollment, we tried to compensate that bringing international students into our programs. But even with that attraction, the decline is still there. We are at 25%. Because we have also, post-secondary institutions have a limit of how many you can bring into the picture. And saying all this, and there is a silver lining, don't get me wrong, there are great things that hopefully we're gonna be discussing that you can take on and support this. Because this is a future talent, and we are not attracting the talent not only to the industry, but to the education, going to the re-skilling, upskilling piece, and lack of skills that we are experiencing today in our organizations, we need to pay close attention. And the close attention is, and the question to you is, how are you or your organizations connecting or partnering with post-secondary institutions to fill that gap? And there are many ways, and hopefully you're going to be sharing today a little bit more about things that we can do together to support you, to better support you. Students have options now. You know there are many career opportunities. We've seen an exodus of hospitality professionals going to different organizations, going to the banking industry, to the finance industry, to the retail industry. So we are competing. So we need to be competitive on how we are attracting talent. I'm going to leave it like that, and then we can continue.
Wonderful. And I know there are several organizations actively engaged in career awareness campaigns to support our industry, and that includes a lot of private sector companies, post-secondary institutions, and then other government-funded organizations. So I think we'll probably get to that.
That's right.
Tracy, just a quick question to you. So if this labor challenge that we are experiencing today has been around for as long as we believe it has been, is there anything specific that's happening right now that's different than what we've been dealing with in the past, or is this just something that's further come into the light, the labor challenges and the talent pipeline challenges? From your perspective at Accor, is there anything new with what's happening right now, or were you well prepared to deal with this based on the history?
Well, we definitely weren't prepared for this. It's funny, when you look across Accor in the different regions, this notion of labor challenge is very different. So when I speak to my peers who are based in the Middle East, they're not experiencing the same labor challenges as we are. But when you look here in our own backyard in Canada, I honestly cannot remember a time, and I've been in the industry for a long time, I cannot remember a time that has been more challenging. I mean, to say that we're not filling restaurants to maximum capacity because we can't service. We're not maximizing room revenue because we don't have enough people to service the guest. We're capping on inventory. These are things that I just don't ever remember those conversations. I was on the phone the other day with one of our regions in Canada, and they were asking, wanted to talk through some strategies because they can't find people to fill, and they're telling me we're going to have to start closing floors. That's how bad it is. Like, we just cannot continue to deliver the service. And then what happens? So is it a matter of we're going to get the revenue, but at what expense? We can't service them, so then our reputation's impacted. And if our reputation's impacted, it's this whole vicious cycle. Yeah. And I just, honestly, I just don't remember a time when we've had these conversations in the past. And we closed hotels, right? Like, we closed every single hotel across Canada. And it was like we had to build back up from, it was almost like opening a new hotel. Yeah. People left. Where did they go? And it's like starting over, but not having time to start over and rebuild. It's like, we're opening up. We need the staff. We need to recall. They're not coming back. Okay, now, so you just didn't have the pre-planning time. Yeah. So it is definitely different.
Yeah. Thanks. Will, a question over to you. So from that business perspective, are you seeing the labor challenges directly impacting your business's ability to achieve revenue targets, growth targets? Has it actually affected everything at a very high level from a financial perspective?
There's no question, and I think the team up here, as well as the prior panels, did a great job of explaining a lot of the current situation. We have limited capacities, shuttered food and beverage operations, things like this are there. The things I would add to that presently really are that we're now dealing with massive burnout. The people that have survived the last 2 years and have worn 10 different hats and have done all the work of 5 people at one time, we're asking them to do more now, and we're not really staffing back up accordingly quite yet because we can't find labor or don't have it. And so we're asking more with this less. So there's a burnout factor that really ripples from the leadership of the hotels all the way down and really leads to even things like shortcuts at work, injuries, things like this that we're not anticipating that we're dealing with. And so those are big. I would also add that, to your point, when we're talking about restructuring or opening a closed hotel, we're actually having to reinvent a lot of the space in our industry. I mean, 2 specific examples I can give you. Sales departments, if you had a hotel and you had a director of sales and 2 or 3 sales managers, the director of sales stayed, the 3 sales managers left over the last couple of years, and we have to bring entirely new people into the industry and train them and get them up to speed very quickly, and it's gonna be a big challenge. On the F&B side, I'm amazed at the great event we're having here. I mean, a 400-person banquet setting. There's many of my hotels where if we were gonna roll this today, I would know that 30% of the staff I would bring in here to service this group would probably be first day on the job working in this environment. So how do we train these people very quickly and get them in there? And we've lost that F&B expertise and that leadership of how to run a restaurant, how to run a banquet, all that kind of piece in there. The last piece, and Dario, to your point, hearing this loss in enrollment at the collegiate level is just terrifying. And I've worked with some of the brands. We've talked about really how do we kind of bring the sexy back part to our business. I mean, for me, the hotel experience has been a wonderful experience, and I've had experiences in my lifetime that I didn't even deserve, and it's been just a wonderful experience. But a lot of people look at this entry-level stuff in the hotel space, and it's tough. It's hard to attract right now because of what we've gone through the last couple of years. We've got to fix that.
Thank you. Great perspective. Dario, since we're talking about bringing sexy back, I'm going to flip over to you. One of the
How do you like that?
One of the unique innovations that I've seen out of the post-secondary sector over the last few years, but I think especially through the pandemic, was this, the rebranding, if you would, of something that we now refer to as work integrated learning. And just picking up on what you were saying there, Will, can you give us the really quick overview? What is work integrated learning? Dario at George Brown College is the director of work integrated learning and international mobility on behalf of the entire institution. So a really quick snapshot of what work integrated learning is, and if work integrated learning, is there anybody out there who's doing it well? Are there programs that are out there that industry and education are actually working together?
Yeah, and I love that you bring that up, because there is a silver lining for all of us here. And I'm a true believer of will, and that's the reason why I took on this. I used to run the School of Hospitality, but I took on this new challenge. And the challenge is connecting industry and learning. That's the name, work integrated learning. Infusing learning into the workforce. So that helps you. I feel it's a win-win. Will is a win-win for organizations out there, because you are training them, you are preparing them, and these are people, when I'm talking about hospitality students or culinary and tourism students, these are students that went to these programs because they believe, I want to believe that they believe in the industry and they want to have a career. By doing this type of programs, you have a great opportunity to engage them and to retain them. There are many benefits out there today. The federal government, provincial government is issuing a lot of funds and grants and wage subsidies to all of you. In particular, I'm going to mention a few. The provincial government, if you're in Ontario, there's a tax credit when you hire students under a co-op program. And co-op and internships, those are the type of will opportunities that you are very familiar. But there are many others, such as applied projects, working, and that's the reason why we need to start thinking strategically how you are partnering with post-secondary institutions, because institutions also are in a huge need of getting into the actual needs of the industry and understanding what is needed, what is the latest technology. So those are the things that we can work together and help out. But let's not maybe diverge into that. But another great benefit is, I'm going to refer to the Tourism HR Canada, that we're able to secure funding through the federal government when it comes to wage subsidies for students. And now through ESDC funding, or what we call the Propel program, that Tourism HR Canada launched as a delivery partner, now you can hire students and get up to $7,500 wage subsidy back to you. And if you do the math, you are actually having someone working for you for 4 to 5 months for almost free. If you add that to the tax credit as well, you cannot make money off that, but you are going to be actually having an engaged person now, because this person is getting paid for the work that they are doing with you. They are learning, so this is a win-win, and it's a great opportunity for you. There are many of those programs available to you. Happy to continue that conversation. You can reach out to me afterwards, and we can connect you with the right people. Hopefully we have time. I don't want to take over, but talk about sexiness of the attracting, and I believe that's something that we need to do together. We need to sell the industry. You know, we've been talking about for the last 10 years, but are we really doing it? No, not yet. We need to be very strategic on how we are selling career paths and opportunities, so we attract the right talent.
Wonderful, thank you. Philip, over to you. There have been some recent changes in immigration targets set by our federal government. The number that sticks in my head is, a target of 400 to 450,000 immigrants brought into Canada annually, ideally targeted at the labor market. And since we had this dialogue also yesterday, some big news and I think some big advocacy wins in terms of the amendments of the temporary foreign workers policy. Can you give us a sense of how does that immigration number break down? That's obviously a number that's to serve the entire country and all of our industries. How does hospitality, tourism, hotels specifically, stack up in there? And any insights on the recent changes to that temporary foreign worker policy, because I think that is something that people have been waiting for.
Joe, you just opened up a discussion that's a lot more than the time we've got, but let me try to do some quick notes. First of all, and I must disclose, as I'm supposed to, I do sit on the Deputy Minister's immigration panel service to help feed into some of these things. But that aside, look, the current IRC numbers are some of the highest intakes that the Government of Canada has ever taken in. But the number of job vacancies in the labor market overall are roughly double the number than the current intake of over 400,000. So there's no time that we can imagine the immigration system catching up to demand to start. Let's be clear about that. Mm-hmm. Of those coming in as well under the current immigration streams, very few of them are actually destined for this industry because of the nature of the way those streams are set up, i.e. they're not necessarily commensurate with the employment demands. That's not to say all of them, but there's no question they weren't designed with that in mind. I'll bring up Hack again and Susie and her team because we've been working a lot in trying to tackle this concern around the way the immigration system is functioning, really with two key objectives. One is to, in my shorthand, say, to optimize the current streams, and the second is to try to initiate a new dedicated pathway or dedicated stream for the sector. The second one is a much longer term, difficult effort, but certainly work has been done on the first one. And even then, if we optimize what's available through current streams, we still will only be able to facilitate a minimal demand in terms of our sectoral needs. So I can park that for now. We can come back to that if you want. The dedicated stream is a longer term objective, and more advocacy work will be coming up about that. TFW for a moment. TFW is, I'm absolutely astounded by the announcement that was made, I guess 2 days ago already, on TFW. Just a little perspective on this. Historically, this industry has never employed more than 1% of its workforce under TFW. And in the last 3 years, in fact, that program has been tightened. The restrictions have grown intentionally. This is with mass market consultation. All of a sudden, with some wins, I know for sure because of the work done by Hack and others, but Hack for sure was key at the table. All of a sudden, we're getting this opportunity to have as much as 30% of our workforce can be TFWs. That's the announcement. That is a really big deal announcement. And in fact, there's no cap on the numbers we can bring into our sector. From an employer, though, you can only have up to 30%, but still, those are unprecedented numbers. We've never seen anything like it. I'll be interested to see how that plays out. I think it's going to be a bit of a challenge. But that is fantastic news, and I anticipate there's going to be a lot of supports needed by employers to tap into that. There's a lot more I could say about this. There's supply issues beyond immigrants we might want to talk about because the immigration system is certainly one tool, and it's one we're going to have to rely on. Maybe I should pipe in one more because we talked about international students. Yeah. The one stream that's particularly of interest to us in the short term, as a policy directive we're trying to see if we can get some traction around, is to enable international students to be able to work. This is something that could help us in the short term, particularly over our peak season coming up, to help address some of the needs. And it could accelerate us accessing them because they're already here. It's just that policy doesn't enable them to do that. So that's on our table. But I don't want to suggest there's any promises there. This is not simple work, and it's not easy things to shift. But these are the things that are in the fray at the moment in terms of discussions.
Fabulous. Thank you. And congrats on the advocacy again.
No doubts.
Tracy, I want to ask you a question. We have a question from the audience, and it was already into our question bank anyway. So in terms of, there's better practices happening out in the hotel industry right now. Inevitably, there are people who are trying things and they're doing well and they're learning. Is anybody embracing technology? And is technology helping, or is it directly related? This question is specifically about AI. AI in terms of addressing the employment issues or even the innovation from the service offerings.
Yeah.
Anybody leveraging technology that you're aware of right now, or independent of the technology question out there, who's getting this the most right?
Yeah, so, okay, let me address the technology question first. I think, yeah, lots of companies and hotel companies are using AI. But where I've really seen it is around this notion of efficiency. Efficiency such as, check-in, check-out, or around really leveraging it to understand our customer and how we can deliver more personalized service. I mean, Will, I'd love you to jump in here, but I don't know if it's ever going to solve our labor issue.
Right.
I think it'll lend to helping us in a number of ways, and we'll find ways of using it. So, I was at a meeting, a couple months ago, and I had a demo done around technology in a guest room.
Sure.
But it was more, again, from the perspective of, okay, so maybe it takes someone away from, I don't have to call down to the front desk and ask something. I can just push this button and, this iPad in my room, and Siri's going to give me the answer, or, something like that. But I think it'll lend to it. I don't think it's going to solve our issues. What I'd love to see is how does it go, is one of the things you said, Will, and we've really lost our ability to really train and staff up and get people ready to be on the floor. How can we use AI for a better employment experience? Like, we don't really talk about that, but what about better onboarding? What about, leveraging it to
Better training.
better training? Like, I think that's where we need to go, because we're talking about efficiencies. It's not just about efficiencies to get away from hiring people, but it's also efficiencies to get our people skilled up quicker, and also to deliver on a better employee experience. I think there's huge opportunity for that.
In fact, we are looking at AI as a way of bringing that into curriculum. So students go through the learning process through AI enhanced simulation. So based on how much you know, you will go up here or you go up here.
Right.
So those are the things that we need to actually industry and post-secondary education.
Education together, yeah.
We did a bit of a study on this for OECD, and a lot of the ideas of AI or the digitalization exercise is about augmenting as well. But the one thing that's very clear about the study that, again, I'm just bearer of great news here, is that actually means we need more workers, not fewer. However, it will build resilience. And this is what's also contributing to part of that skills gap I'm referring to. Like, even what you're describing, if you think about the capacity you need to do that, it's a very different skill set at the same time. Nonetheless, it's a necessity to go in this direction. So it's changing our workforces. It's quite a dramatic shift, but in the end, it'll serve us well.
And so I maybe we can just have a little bit more conversation around this, because I also wonder about the people we're recruiting. Like, if I think about Gen Z entering into our industry, do they just expect it to be there? Like, do they, this is what they grew up with. Like, think about Gen Zs entering, that we're hiring today. What have they been doing for the last 2 years?
What?
They've been sitting at home in front of a computer learning, and isn't this what they're going to expect? I mean, we've just created a whole different generation of expectations, and we better be able to figure it out in our workplace of how we're going to deliver on that.
Yeah.
But picking up on the workplace point, I'm sorry, I got to just jump on this point, but what's interesting about what happened in the pandemic as well is the move to more remote workers. Now, this is happening for various reasons. Now, obviously, a lot of our workforce cannot be remote per se, but a good portion can be.
They can be.
And in fact, they need to be because of the scarcity of employees, right? And so there's more of this kind of work happening remotely with fewer people doing those functional roles, and they're not even in your region anymore. That is another reason why this whole movement to AR digitalization is going to make making a big difference to the industry.
And you asked the question, Joe, about is anyone getting it right? What are some of the, better practices? I do think we're creative in our industry. When I say creative in our industry, we're doing things different in our industry. If I was to have this conversation with someone in the financial industry, they might look at me like, oh, really? Or you're just doing that now? But we are doing things different. That whole notion of hybrid work, if you talk to a general manager in a hotel 3 years ago, they probably would say, yeah, we don't let people work from home. Today, it's a real conversation, and we're even posting jobs like that. But I mean, even a few years ago, if I looked at it, retention bonuses and signing bonuses were one-offs.
Right.
Today, it's the norm.
Yeah.
It's just, we've just evolved because we've had to.
Yeah.
And it just becomes a part of normal business today.
Yeah.
If I could just add one piece on that AI to your point, where we're seeing the money flow and the investment flow on AI is really back of the house. It's more in accounting operations and preventative maintenance systems, building control items, with a few slight exceptions. We've actually installed some robots in a few hotels, which are largely Instagram moments. However, when we look at them, at the end of the year, they've done 7,000 deliveries. So they're, it's not insignificant, but it's really mostly just kind of a PR component. So anyway, point being, a lot of the AI piece, I'm seeing more back of the house than I am on the service side.
Yeah. And Will, just a follow-up question from some of the things that Philip was framing for us. You see high levels of immigration number, the boost of temporary foreign workers, international students even. Do your properties, do your hotels have housing capacity, or not even necessarily within themselves, but within their local communities? I mean, as soon as I saw all those numbers come out, the first thing I thought is, where are we going to put all these people?
That's right.
And we are facing our own, housing affordability challenges if we're just taking care of the people who are presently, in Canada and calling it home. Seeing it from the student perspective, but also just as people mature through their lives and trying to move on, and then to think about high numbers of immigration, high numbers of temporary foreign workers. Where are we going to put all these people? Not that I'm expecting you to come up with that solution now, but from one perspective, is this something you're wrestling with?
It is absolutely something we're wrestling with right now. I mean, we probably spend $1.5 million a year up to, heading towards $2 million a year in employee accommodations. It's not everywhere. It's really in anywhere we have a resort or a destination location. That's where we're wrestling with this housing issue. And it's really a couple different issues. One, is there availability for housing? And, VRBO, Airbnb has had an impact on that, not only from an availability, but also from a pricing standpoint, but also the quality of the accommodations. So, really for us, when we rolled into COVID, we had a number of houses in Whistler rented, and, we put in, 8 international traveling 20-year-olds. It might not have been the most COVID-friendly environment you've ever seen initially, so we had a lot of management and upkeep we had to do in that environment. It all worked really pretty well, but the shared living environment is not for everybody, and so I think as we look as an industry as we go forward, one of the things that are critically important is to have accommodations as close to the facility or within the facility as you can, and then single bedroom kind of opportunities. The more you can create that, the more successful we'll be. And then really, that is, we kind of see that. It's easy for us to all see that on the, labor, front of the house, the traveling student piece, but it also affects our senior leadership. I mean, if we're trying to transfer an executive chef or a housekeeping manager from one market into us, if they have children, if they have family, they do not want to live in a shared environment, but they can't yet afford to come into, a Whistler or a Kelowna and buy a, 2 or 3 bedroom house or townhome or anything like that. So this is very much an issue that we're dealing with, and we're growing and we're adding the capacity. Fortunately, we're able to push the ADR in those markets, so it's working right now, but it is not sustainable long term.
Yeah, thanks. It certainly frames this issue as something much more complex and something that requires a lot of investigation and a lot of intervention strategies to really try to lift us forward. Tracy, we got a question there. I think you're probably best positioned to answer it, so we're going to do this question and then just a couple of wrap-up comments from the panel because we're down to only a few minutes left. From an operator perspective, what are new hires looking for from an employer, and how are operators adjusting to attract their talent?
Yeah, I think new hires, it really just depends on who the audience is. So if I'm talking about, a new hire who's Gen Z, well, studies say, okay, well, maybe money's not the most important thing to them, but you better be offering them career development. You better be offering them some flexibility. Whereas if it's, someone who's older in their career, I think, benefits are probably important to them. So I think you have to look at it from a customized approach. It's not, you can't just go out with one size fits all. It's just not going to work for you. And it's not going to work to attract individuals. But I really think what people are looking for, and I think this is where we have a really good opportunity, it's creating a very positive culture. People want to work in places that have a positive culture. They want to work in places where there's good leadership and where they're taken care of, and they don't want to be working for a jerk.
Yeah, thank you.
And I think when people who've left our industry to go to those higher paid jobs, I do think some of them might come back for culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, we're down to our last couple of minutes, and I just want to ask each of you one question. It's a tricky one, but sometimes being succinct is important. If you could make one recommendation to everybody in this room right now in terms of what they can focus on, what they can prioritize over the next 12 months. Phil, I'm going to put you on the spot first. One recommendation.
But it needs to be short too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's part of the challenge. Listen, I hope I'm not insulting anyone by saying this, but one of our key findings in our research, and it's been an issue we've seen long before COVID, but it's been only heightened during COVID, is that there needs to be a much better understanding of the investment of the workforce itself. They are not a cost, they are an investment, and all of the practices surrounding that need to be really ramped up. In other words, HR practices are lagging, and this speaks to a bit of this employee environment. And I want to add that there's really sort of three key dimensions we see. One is that there needs to be a much better way of measuring what people are doing. They're not simply doing it, and so this is, of course, means that it's not informing good policy. But they also have to get a much better handle on understanding the labor market conditions, the socioeconomic, political factors, which do impact them, whether they realize it or not. It's beyond their front doors. And finally, they need to ramp up the expertise they have in their managers and their HR teams, which is very different than what it was pre-pandemic, by the way. There's far more complexity. Moving forward, if you don't invest in that team alone, you're just not going to survive.
Yeah, great, thank you. Will, quickly, one recommendation.
I think we have to really create a sense of belonging for new people into the industry, and that involves welcoming in a very inclusive environment. And I think we really need to expedite onboarding, hiring qualified, capable candidates.
Wonderful, thank you. Tracy.
I'd say that if today I don't have enough people to fill my hotel and enough people to do the jobs, then use all of the resources available to you, whether it's through foreign worker program, whether it's through the funding from the government to help fund your payroll, and really take a look at what's going to cost more money. If I raise rates of pay by $2 versus not filling guest rooms, where am I going to, really do that analysis, because I think sometimes we just don't do it. So do the analysis.
Thank you. Dario.
Post-secondary institutions are a great source of talent. So I feel that if I need to give you one take on this, partner with them in a strategic way, not just partner as we used to be, what we've been doing for the last 20, 30 years, with intent, partner with intent to fill your talent gap. There are great opportunities, funding opportunities, there are great things that we can do together. So I can't wait to hear from all of you.
Wonderful. Thank you, panelists, for joining. Just
Thank
very
you.
quickly before I hand it over to Stephanie, we started with a quote from Abraham Lincoln about chopping down a tree, and there's an African proverb that I think we should reflect on as we walk away here, and thinking about the impact that the last couple of years has had on the labor market and the individuals themselves. The axe forgets, but the tree remembers. Thank you, everybody. Thanks.
Thanks so much to our panel.
Nice job, guys.
We're going that way.